Elizabeth continued her walk alone, crossing field after field at a quick pace, jumping over stiles and springing over puddles with impatient activity, and finding herself at last within view of the house with weary ankles, dirty stockings, and a face glowing with the warmth of exercise. Hello, I'm Tiffany from Stitchin' Addiction. I am so glad that you are here watching my newest video on YouTube and participating in virtual JaneCon. I'm super excited for this event and I hope that you are enjoying all of the content so far. I know that I am really looking forward to seeing some of the videos on this weekend's programming. As readers, when we read, we often picture what's going on in our mind. And when I've read Pride and Prejudice, I've often pictured Lizzy's walk across the field to go visit Jane at Netherfield. First off, this was an act of independence because her mother didn't want her to go. And secondly, she walked through the fields and arrived dirty, right? And so today I'm going to be characterizing Elizabeth Bennet based on what we know about her from Pride and Prejudice. I will be researching historical fashion for a woman of her age, her status, and of course that particular era in time. And then I will be showing you the design that I come up with after my research and giving you glimpses of the process in making that dress, from drafting to cutting out to fitting to sewing, all of the steps that are taken when I'm making a historical dress. At the end, I will show off the dress for you, and then you will also have the opportunity to commission a dress like this in the size and fabric of your choice. So let's begin by characterizing Elizabeth Bennet, or Lizzy as I like to call her. Her family called her Lizzy, which shows that that was the familiar term of endearment for her, whereas people that didn't know her as well, people outside of her family, called her Elizabeth, and in some cases, Eliza. The first thing that we notice about Elizabeth when reading Pride and Prejudice is that Elizabeth is seen as someone who is intelligent in the opinion of others. The first thing that her father says about her is, he says, Lizzy has something more of quickness than her sisters. This is, of course, when Mrs. Bennet is begging him to go introduce himself to Mr. Bingley so that one of the girls has a chance at marrying Mr. Bingley. And he is saying, make sure that you recommend Lizzy because she's the quickest of the girls. She also is viewed as sensible by her aunt. Her aunt mentions when she's in direct conversation to Lizzy, she says, you are too sensible a girl, Lizzy, to fall in love merely because you are warned against it. So the people around her see her as someone who is intelligent and even intuitive. And we see more of her intuitiveness in her conversations and her thoughts throughout Pride and Prejudice. She is often contrasted with Jane, whereas Jane likes to believe the best in everyone, and she's always enumerating their good qualities. Elizabeth will often say, look, not everybody is good. You need to make sure that you're looking at them critically and thinking about this person and making sure they're not pulling the wool over your eyes. She says this multiple times to Jane, especially in regards to Bingley's sisters. So after the first time that Elizabeth and Jane have met the Bingleys at the ball, they are, of course, discussing them. And, of course, Jane is talking about all of the good things that she sees in the Bingleys and Mr. Darcy. But Elizabeth listened in silence but was not convinced. Their behavior at the assembly had not been calculated to please in general, and with more quickness of observation and less pliancy of temper than her sister, and with a judgment too unassailed by any attention to herself, she was very little disposed to approve them. So we see here her intuitiveness and her ability to read people better than some of the other members of her family. And I think that Austen particularly sets them up as foils for Elizabeth in this regard. She sets up Jane as a foil. She sets up even Miss Bennet as a foil, with the way that Miss Bennet is naive and does not see a lot of things in different people. Both of those characters serve as a foil for Elizabeth throughout Pride and Prejudice. We also see this when Elizabeth is discussing Wickham with Jane. It's when Elizabeth has finally realized that Wickham is not all goodness and that he is to blame for some of the things that happened between him and Mr. Darcy. And she's told Jane all these things, and Jane is still trying to come up with a way to say, oh no, Wickham is okay. He probably this happened or probably that happened, and that's why Darcy sees it this way. And Elizabeth finally exclaims, "This will not do," said Elizabeth. "You will never be able to make both of them good for anything. Take your choice, but you must be satisfied with only one. There is but such a quantity of merit between them, just enough to make one good sort of man, and of late it has been shifting about, pretty much. For my part, I am inclined to believe it all Mr. Darcy's, but you shall do as you choose." So we see again that she is very good at reading people and kind of digging down into what these people are really like. Obviously, she is taken by Wickham at first, but that is the only time you really see her taken by someone where her intuitiveness fails her throughout Pride and Prejudice. Another thing that we notice that has to do with her intelligence and her intuitiveness is her awareness of social conventions. We see this several different times, but the one that I wanted to point out in particular is the one where Mr. Bennet has given permission for Lydia to go with the Foresters. And Elizabeth is trying to convince her dad that that's not a wise decision. She says, "I have no such injuries to resent. It is not of peculiar, but of general evils of which I am now complaining. Our importance, our respectability in the world must be affected by the wild volatility, the assurance and disdain of all restraint which mark Lydia's character. Excuse me, for I must speak plainly. If you, my dear father, will not take the trouble of checking her exuberant spirits and of teaching her that her present pursuits are not to be the business of her life, she will soon be beyond the reach of amendment. Her character will be fixed, and she will at 16 be the most determined flirt that ever made herself and her family ridiculous." So she really is pointing out to her dad here that, it's not just going to affect Lydia, it's going to affect all of us because of the social expectations and social conventions that were expected of women in the Regency period. So once again, here we see her intelligence and her intuitiveness. It's not just that she's book smart, but that she is able to read people and read the surroundings and then make her decisions based on that. Another character trait, one that I think we all love about Elizabeth, is that she is independent. We, of course, see that in the first quote that I read from chapter 7, where she goes walking, right? She is very worried about Jane because her mom sent Jane to Netherfield without the carriage, and Jane got sick as a result. And so Elizabeth has now received word that Jane is stuck at Netherfield because she's not feeling well enough to come home. And so she's determined to go over there, and she doesn't have the carriage and she doesn't ride horses. And so she is going to have to walk. And it says, Elizabeth, feeling really anxious, was determined to go to her, though the carriage was not to be had. And as she was no horsewoman, walking was her only alternative. She declared her resolution. And her family tries to convince her otherwise, and she doesn't listen. She walks to Netherfield, as we know, and arrives with her hems 6 inches deep in mud, as Caroline Bingley remarks later on in the chapter. We also see her independence when she refuses Collins, right? She is aware of the societal conventions and the societal expectations for women, but she is also not afraid to make the best decision for herself when faced with a marriage proposal that she is sure would not make her happy. And so, of course, he gives his long proposal, and she refuses him once, and he tries to tell her that, oh no, you're just playing with my feelings, and she refuses him again. She says, upon my word, sir, cried Elizabeth, your hope is rather an extraordinary one after my declaration. I do assure you that I am not one of those young ladies, if such young ladies there are, who are so daring as to risk their happiness on the chance of being asked a second time. I am perfectly serious in my refusal. You could not make me happy, and I am convinced that I am the last woman in the world who could make you so. And as we know, he continues to propose to her. He tries to argue back with her 2 more times, and she has to refuse him 2 more times. So once again, that shows her independence and even her stubbornness, as she is willing to make a decision and stick with it, even though she knows it's going to displease her mother, and it flies in the face of society's expectations and conventions. She's also a dreamer and an idealist in some respects, however. She is mostly practical. She can see people for who they are. But on the other hand, she is very determined to marry for love. Although I couldn't find her exactly saying that anywhere in Pride and Prejudice, this is something that's inferred from many of her conversations with Jane and her decisions in who she actually marries. Of course, she refuses Mr. Collins by saying, we're not going to make each other happy. She doesn't actually say, I don't love you and you don't love me, but she does say, we're not going to make each other happy. And then when Mr. Darcy proposes to her and then goes to ask permission from her father, and her father calls her in and is like, Lizzy, am I really hearing this? Like, is this really true? Surely this is a joke, right? And she finally says, I do like him. She replied with tears in her eyes, I love him. So we see that she is a dreamer and an idealist because she is willing to hold out and marry for love, because despite the fact that many women of her era would end up just marrying for status or for money in the first engagement that came along to them that looked promising, she actually was willing to wait and find someone that she felt like she truly loved and who truly loved her. So based on the fact that these are her predominant character traits, we have her intelligence and intuitiveness, we have her independence, and then of course we have her side of idealism, where she's a little bit of a dreamer when it comes to the era that she's living in and her marital relationship. We are going to now look at what she might have worn that would have been historically accurate based on her age, the era, of course, which is the Regency period, and the status in life that she is given throughout Pride and Prejudice. So Pride and Prejudice was published in 1811. I particularly chose to look at Regency era styles from 1800 to 1810 when researching styles that would have been common during that era. And one of the very common styles that I found is the drop front bodice dress. So this dress looks like a puzzle to get into when you first see it, because you cannot see any openings in it at all to get it on. And unlike some of the dresses of the period, it does not close in the back with either ties or buttons. It's called a drop front or a bib front dress on purpose because, as you can see, the front drops down to reveal the closure. And because this was a very popular dress for that era, and also practical as far as you could get yourself dressed. We know from Pride and Prejudice that it appears they had one major ladies' maid that helped with all of the women's dress and hair. That would have meant that they would have had to help each other get dressed and do their hair sometimes, or even get themselves ready sometimes. And so this makes it seem like this would have been a practical style that Elizabeth would have worn, because she could have gotten herself dressed. Now, obviously, because she is walking in this dress during the day, it's not a ball or anything fancy. It is most likely a day dress that she's wearing, and this bib front dress would have been a day dress for the era as well. So that's another reason that I chose this particular design for Lizzy Bennet's walking dress. She is a gentleman's daughter, but she is a country girl. One of the sources that I use when researching Regency fashion is Dress in the Age of Jane Austen by Hilary Davidson. This is a great book if you have not read it, and a great read. And she points out when Caroline Bingley makes the comment about Elizabeth's hem being 6 inches deep in mud, there's actually a deeper meaning to that. It's not just about her being a walker, it's about her being a country rustic. Caroline's pointing out that she's not as refined as Caroline and some of the other girls would be because they're from the city. So her dresses probably also, because of that, would have been more practical and more simple because she's a country gentleman's daughter. If you would like to see the inspiration for this dress, besides the images that I have put in this video, you can follow the link below to my Pinterest board. I have pinned links to various extant dresses from the time period that are bib front or drop front bodices so that you can see what some of the dresses of that era would have looked like, and of course you can compare my final product to those dresses. Once I decided what dress design I thought that Elizabeth might have worn, I then sketched it. So I have a sewing journal that I sketch all of my designs in. So I'm going to show you the sketch that I drew out for Elizabeth's dress. So here is the sketch of Elizabeth Bennet's walking dress. As you can see, I didn't draw out exactly how the drop front of the bodice works. You'll get to see that more as you see me drafting and creating the pattern. And then of course, in the final dress where I show you how to get dressed in it. But you can see the basic idea. You have the, of course, empire waistline with a little bit of gathers, the band across the top, the long sleeves. I decided to put a little bit of ruffle on the end of the sleeves. That was actually really common when I was looking at extant dresses. Of course, the back has the princess seams. They were straighter, more than curved at that point from 18 to 1810, and so I kind of made them pretty straight. The shoulder seams did not sit on the shoulder. They actually came over down the back, more to the neckline. And then, of course, there is full gathering in the back of the skirt. And then I am looking at possibly putting a tuck in the skirt as well. And then I had to choose the fabric. So I had to decide what color and or print do I think that Elizabeth would have most likely worn. And so for that, I went back to her character traits, which we discussed earlier. She is intuitive and intelligent. She is independent. She is also somewhat of a dreamer and an idealist, especially when it comes to marriage and love and relationships. And so I looked at several different options. One of them was a tan cotton print that kind of imitated the roller prints of the day. And then the other one that I looked at was a lavender colored linen. And I actually was really torn in between the two. I put it on my Instagram as a poll, and some of my followers helped me decide which one best seemed to match her character traits. And so we ended up going with the lavender linen. So here's a swatch of the lavender linen that I'm going to use to make her dress. And lavender actually symbolizes many of the things that we discussed about Elizabeth. It symbolizes intuitiveness, it symbolizes deep thinking, it symbolizes an independence because you're willing to go a little bit against the flow and wear something that's a little bit different. We know that people that wear purple or lavender are not just going with the traditional and conventional colors typically. So I felt like the color lavender was very appropriate for Lizzy because that is definitely her. She's willing to go a little bit against the flow, especially when it comes to those expectations about marriage. The dresses of the time period would have been made of lightweight fabrics such as linens, cottons, silks. Because she is a country gentleman's daughter, she is probably not going to have a lot of silks, so that left me between linen and cotton. And as I mentioned before, the other fabric I was looking at was a lightweight cotton, but I ended up going with the linen. In this next part, I'm going to be drafting the pattern, cutting out the mock-up and fitting that to make sure that it fits exactly the way that I want, and then cutting out the actual fabric and sewing the actual dress. So I hope you enjoy these little glimpses into the process of making a historical dress for a literary character. wanted to show you how Lizzy Bennet most likely would have gotten dressed. Now that I have the dress completed, I wanted to show you the undergarments all the way out. So she would have started with a chemise. The chemise was the undergarment worn closest to the body. It went underneath all of the other layers, and the biggest reason for the chemise was to keep all of the other garments as clean as possible. Chemises were washed very often, whereas the stays and the outerwear and those things were not washed very often. And then on top of that would have been the stays. There were short stays and there were long stays. I actually did mine kind of in between. It depended on your bust size and the kind of support you were looking for. So these are my stays made from red threads pattern. The chemise is one that I drafted myself from a diagram of an extant that I found on a website. Then on top of that, she would have put a petticoat. So there were two major style petticoats in the Regency period. One of them had a bodice and then the other one did not. I'm wearing the one without the bodice today because the low cut of the neckline in the back of this dress was showing the bodice of my bodice petticoat. So this one just is going to tie right underneath the bust line. So it has little straps that go over the shoulders to hold it up. And then it is going to tie just beneath the bust line to go along with where everything else, the Empire waistline, which is the biggest mark of the Regency period. And as you can see, it has drawstrings in the waistband, so you can pull it smaller or larger to fit. This one actually fits my sister too when we did our Bridgerton photo shoot a little while ago, and so she wore this one. It also it mirrors the dress in the sense that the gathering is in the back and not in the front. You want the front to be mostly flat. Some of the very early Regency styles had some gathers in the front, but a lot of them did not. And then, of course, the dress. And so this is what I mean when I say that this is one that you could get dressed in by yourself without having to have a lady's maid. So I'll show you. Most everything went on over the head because once you have your chemise on, it's very hard to pull anything up from the bottom because it pulls your chemise up and then your petticoat and everything else eventually, and does not work. So the first part is to get this bodice adjusted correctly, and then it has the underpiece and that buttons. Some of them have ties, some of them were pinned. I chose to use buttons as an easy way to close this part. I didn't find any examples that actually had buttons. I saw a lot that had ties or were pinned from the extants. So I did differ from the extants at this point. And then you want to pull this down and make sure it's in the right spot and tuck everything in. This is part of getting dressed for Regency. You're always having to make sure everything is tucked where it's supposed to be. And then you're going to bring this bib up, and if I turn around you can see where the strings cross in the back. They've already been run in the loops in the back, and then I just want to pull those tight. And from most of what I found, the strings were tied on the inside underneath. They were not tied on the outside where they were visible. In the front, in the back you could see them on a lot of the extant dresses that I looked at, but in the front, most of what I found, they were tied in the front. This one I made the bow slightly off center so that it kind of hides underneath here and is not just in the front center of my waist. And then I'm going to tuck all of that in here into the skirt and make sure that everything is adjusted so that it's mostly centered. And then I'll pull this up. These button right here. but they also would use pens, and mine kind of hangs funny if I just button it, so I'm actually going to use both. I actually am buttoning it on the edge and then running a pen hidden underneath so that it holds it correctly. One side, button this side, and then run a pen underneath there. And then you just want to adjust all your layers. So make sure your chemise and all your strings are tucked away where they should be. You want to adjust all of this and make sure that everything is covered the way it should be. And you also want to kind of pull these strings up so they're running across the bottom of the bodice as opposed to running beneath it. And then I will do the final turnaround so that you can see the whole dress. And then now I'm ready to go out walking like Lizzie. As you can see, this is a style dress you can get in by yourself. Many of the Regency dresses I have made prior to this button down the back, and I can never get all the buttons by myself. I can usually get some of the top ones and some of the bottom ones, but I can never get the middle ones. So I usually have to get my husband, or if I'm with my sister, to finish buttoning them. So this is one of the reasons I thought this might be a dress that Elizabeth would have worn, because she tended to be more independent, and they only had one ladies' maid according to Pride and Prejudice for all of the Bennet women. And so I'm sure that there were days she just wanted to be able to get herself dressed and not have to worry about having someone help her. You will have to excuse my hair, for I have been out walking. I am very fond of walking. I hope that you have enjoyed this process throughout this video, as I have characterized Lizzie, researched and designed a dress that I think she might have worn, and then of course done the drafting and the sewing to make the actual dress. I've really enjoyed having you along on this process, and I would love to know your thoughts below about Lizzie or about other favorite characters that you have in Pride and Prejudice or Jane Austen's works. Please follow me both here and on Instagram and Facebook if you are interested in watching as I characterize some other characters from Pride and Prejudice and create outfits for them throughout this year. It's a project that I have just started, and I'm super excited to create outfits for different characters in Pride and Prejudice. Along those lines, this outfit for Lizzie is actually not complete. While this video focused on her walking dress, to be historically accurate, she would have also worn a bonnet and some sort of outerwear. So I have a bonnet and a spencer planned, and I will be working on those in the near future. If I do not make a video about them, I will definitely be posting photos of them on Instagram and Facebook. So if you want to see those, definitely follow me there. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there will be an opportunity for you to order a dress like this for yourself. I accept commissions, and I have an Etsy shop, which is linked in the description box below. And because I am so excited about being part of Virtual Jane Con this weekend, and I'm so excited that you are here, I am offering a limited time coupon for any Regency fashion that is in my shop, including this dress. This includes both items that are ready to ship and items that are commissioned. So if you like this dress, I highly recommend that you click on the link below and take a look in my shop and take advantage of the coupon code. The coupon code is VirtualJaneCon21. I have typed it out below so that there is no confusion, and it is good only today, May 1st, and tomorrow, May 2nd, 2021. I also always enjoy new challenges when it comes to creating new items in historical fashion. So if you have something in mind that is not in my shop, please get in touch through social media or through Etsy, and I would love to talk to you about what you have in mind. I hope you have enjoyed this video as much as I have enjoyed making it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.